Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Holloway. I'm the chair of the International Business Society. Just wanted to welcome you all out on a Wednesday evening. Thanks for coming out. We've got a fantastic group of panelists of 5 that you're going to hear from momentarily. So again, thanks for coming out. Our society has got a few events coming up. This is our first event this year. We've got several events coming up throughout the year, so stay tuned, and hope to see a lot of you at our events throughout the year. Also got a few board members here as well, so welcome to all the International Business Society board members. Also wanted to give a thanks to the sponsors. First, the sponsor is Georgia Tech, their International Business Education and Research Center. So thanks to them. You'll be hearing more about them in just a few moments from John McIntyre. And then also Fraser and Dieter, thank you to them. They're a full service accounting and advisory firm based here in Atlanta. So thanks to our sponsors. And then last, before we get started, just save your questions. We'll have time for questions, certainly. If not during, definitely kind of toward the end of the program. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nina as well. So Nina is actually a board member with the International Board Society as well. She'll be introducing our panelists. So I'll turn it over to you, Nina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for making it through the rain and for being here and for taking the day after Valentine's to be among us, right? So I wanted to just quickly take a quick minute and introduce myself to those of you that don't know me. I am Nina DeAugustinis. I have lived my career on an international platform. I'm a management consultant by trade and have advised pretty much the C-suite on strategic planning and implementation. I speak 4 languages fluently. I've lived more than half of my life in Europe, Germany and Portugal, equal amounts, ironically. And am in the final stages of pursuing a PhD in business psychology with a concentration and research focus of cross-cultural upbringing and global leadership. So that is no small picnic, but that's just a little bit about me. If you're curious about the research or me, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. But right now, I really don't want to take any time away from our event and from our panelists. And so I am really excited to introduce them. I will, in advance, apologize. I will be reading their bios because they are rock stars, all of them, in their own right, and I can't possibly memorize all of that, all of their amazing accomplishments. So I will start with Vicki Flyer Hudson, right here. And this young lady is the Chief Collaboration Officer of Highland Global Services, a company that exists to release the power of diverse teams. She is also partner and executive coach for the People First Elevation team, where she helps clients transform company-wide events into meaningful, value-centered experiences. She has a strong track record of results with companies like Procter & Gamble, IHG, the Coca-Cola Company, UPS, NASA, CDC, and several others. She's a registered mediator with the Georgia Office of Dispute Resolution and a moderator for Braver Angels, which is a nonprofit which teaches skills for dialogue across political differences. Wow, now that's a job in itself. Okay. Vicki has lived and worked in several countries, including Belgium, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Nepal, and Thailand. She is also the author of 3 books. And one thing you would not know about her is that she plays the electric guitar and that she sings in a Rush tribute band. So please help me welcome Vicki. Then next we have Darlene Lynch. Hi, Darlene. Darlene is an accomplished lawyer and public. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Maybe if we can consolidate. Maybe. Is an accomplished lawyer and public policy professional with more than 25 years experience, working in social justice and economic empowerment issues on the state, federal, and international levels. Darlene is the head of external relations for the Center for Victims of Torture, Georgia, CVT. Darlene is the founder and chair of the Business and Immigration for Georgia Partnership, which is the first partnership in the state to bring together businesses and civic leaders committed to strengthen Georgia's economy by tapping into the deep pool of talent that exists in its diverse refugee and immigrant communities. That's awesome. She also co-chairs the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies, a 25-member coalition made up of Georgia's leading refugee and immigration service agencies. And prior to joining CVT, Darlene lived in Geneva and worked as an advocate at the United Nations focused on children's rights. She previously served on the faculty of Emory, Harvard, and Boston University Law School, and began her career as the prosecutor and a trial attorney. Quite a change. She previously served on the, she is a volunteer CASA for foster youth, a pro bono attorney for immigrant victims of violence, and a member of Georgia's statewide human trafficking task force. Wow. And one thing you would not know about Darlene is that both her and her husband come from very large families, 7 siblings each.
Wow.
They have 3 children. They have 34 nieces and nephews. So can you imagine Thanksgiving at that family? Please help me welcome Darlene. And then on the far, far end, we have Lars Mins. Thank you, Lars, for being here, and welcome. Lars is the Chief HR Officer for Mercedes-Benz North America. No small job there, with only 11,000 employees under your belt, if I read that correctly. His responsibilities carry over the US and Canada, and he's been with the organization since March of 2015. Under his leadership, the organization is undergoing one of the largest transformations in the automotive industry in its pursuit to be the most desired electric luxury brand in North America. Prior to joining Mercedes, he spent 10 years at the Home Depot and served in roles of increasing responsibility. He is a member of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank Human Capital Advisory Council, Leadership Atlanta, and Board of Trustees and Mount Vernon Presbyterian School. I always want to say church when I read that, but it's school. Lars earned his bachelor's degree in business management from Hampton University in Virginia. And one interesting fact about Lars, in his younger years, he has not only met one, but 2 very public, powerful people. He has met Pope John Paul II and, get this, Queen Elizabeth II. Wow. And please help me welcome Lars. All right, we have 2 more to go. John McIntyre, immediately to my left. Thank you, John, for being here. He is the scholar among us. Although, you know, there's competition here. But John McIntyre is the director of Georgia Tech Center for International Business Education and Research, a national center for excellence and in existence since 1993. Most of us don't even know it existed, me included. But we're about to change that, aren't we? Yeah, there we go. He is a full professor of management, specializing in international business operations and environment at the Scheller College of Business. He has a joint appointment with the Georgia Tech Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. He is also faculty advisor to the Georgia Tech Fulbright Student Association, graduate level, and the Georgia Tech ISEC undergraduate programs, and teaches in the MBA program. John is an author of 14 books. Don't worry, I'm not going to list all 14 of them, but I will mention 2 because they're actually relevant to our topic. The role of multinational enterprises in supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the second one is the new Chinese dream, industrial transition in the post-pandemic era. John has consulted in various international companies and organizations in France, Japan, Germany, and Canada. His graduate degrees are from Northeastern, but his PhD is from UGA. And one interesting fact about John is that he was raised in a Catholic boarding school in Paris. But get this, he finished his high school in Memphis, Tennessee. Do you think he had some culture transition? Please help me welcome Lars.
John.
Oh, you looked at it? Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
We have a good piece on the Chinese aeronautical industry, civilian. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you, gentlemen, and just finish off the introductions and then get into our topic. So we have, last but certainly not least, Karen Weinstock, the lady in the red. That's actually a song, isn't it?
Yes.
There we go. And kind of my brainstorming partner early on as this topic was concerned. So thank you, Karen, for that time. Karen is managing attorney of Weinstock Immigration Lawyers, a top immigration law firm in Atlanta. With over 2 decades of experience, she has substantial experience representing U.S. and international companies to secure global talent and ensure a successful transition for foreign employees and their families. Karen has helped many international enterprises from small startups to Fortune 500 companies and international investors achieve their American dream. Born and raised in Israel, Karen immigrated to the U.S. in 2000. And her passion for immigration law is directly a result of that personal experience. And her compassion for clients and commitment to excellence distinguishes her as one of the best immigration lawyers in the nation. Karen is often consulted for advice in complex immigration matters. She's a role model among women entrepreneurs and an author of a relationship book herself. And her little interesting fact is that she is known as MacGyver. And I thought, She says, yes, to those closest to me, I'm known as MacGyver because I have a tool or solution for everything. So please help me welcome Karen. All right, I will transition. I know our time is very tight, so I will transition us right into our questions. The layout will take the next 40 minutes or so for the panel. And then at the end, we'll have 10 minutes roughly for Q&A from the audience, if that's okay. All right, I will start actually with the last gentleman, Lars, if I may. Under your leadership, Mercedes is undergoing one of the largest transformations in the automotive industry, not a small task. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how this transition affects your human capital? And let me give you do we have another mic? I thought we had another one. Go ahead.
I'll try to put it in practical terms. It's a big endeavor, but I would say every automotive company is on the same path. So the road is certainly packed. But in our respective case, we're going from a combustion engine to an electric engine, if you will. It sounds rather easy, but it impacts your entire value chain. Because what you would normally do once you've sold a vehicle is of course have those vehicles back in a workshop and you'd repair them as you normally would. That's going to fundamentally change once we move to electric. We know that combustion engine vehicles go to service stations. There'll need to be a charging network, all of which we're starting to invest in, and hopefully there'll be other investors, and this will improve the overall infrastructure. What it's done, though, I think it's really impressed upon us the importance of mindset change. So for 136 years, we've actually done things the same way, to our benefit, but we've done things the same way. And now with this ushering into electric and for us to be desired as a luxury brand, it's really forced us to think differently. As far as human capital is concerned, I think this is a TBD for us because, again, we need to not only redevelop or reskill the individuals that work for us, but also we need to attract a new brand of individual. We will continue to attract engineers, but I think the way we go to market on the sales front will also look very different. So there'll be a lot of changes for us. I think we're on the way. We're certainly not arrived, but we feel like we've left. But we need other competitors with us beyond just the obvious one that has cornered the electric market. So it's a TBD at the moment, but I think we have the right moxie. 36 plus years gives you a lot of advantages. But again, as I said, the road will be filled with many companies along the way. I think the biggest thing that we've underestimated that we've learned perhaps from Chinese companies, people are joining or decided to purchase electric vehicles not because of the drive experience, but because of the infotainment experience. And that's brand new for us in North America as it relates to electric vehicles. So software will have to be the name of the game. But happy to be here. Thank you very much for your question, Nina.
Anyone like to add to that?
Well, it's in the form of a question. I mean, namely, I think you are hinting that human skills is at the heart of the corporation, and that it's the most valuable assets, perhaps more than the technology. So it's a revaluation of your workforce. Are there specific things you look for when you hire, at least stateside, new graduates? Which, I have some ideas here, but they are not from the user's endpoint, but rather the producer. So
yeah. I'd say there are three things, two of which are fairly obvious. Data and digital certainly will reign supreme as far as skills we're looking for and skills we hope to develop. The one, though, I think it's those that are willing to break the norms of how we work. So we just kicked off today an official Agile certification program across the company. And we decided to go beyond the bounds of just IT and those that are in the digital space. We wanted to do it in HR. I'm actually Agile certified. We wanted to do it across a number of administrative functions because that mindset is going to be critical. If we really expect to buffer those that have to do it with those that are in a functional space that also should have to do it. So those are probably the three things that we're ultimately looking for. I would say just very simply, we're looking for people to just take chances. That is not akin to a German company. Mm-hmm. We want people to live life and lean into different processes versus manage it. And that's no disparagement to my German colleagues, but I just think if you know anything about those safely run businesses, that can't be the future. So
you're not a lifetime company, and Generation Z they like to jump around,
Well, and the German engineering mentality is, for those of you who have either lived in Germany or work with German engineers, is very, very stay in the box. Like, don't think.
Yes, I was raised there, and there's some truth to that. Thank you, Lars. I appreciate it. As a follow-up, Darlene, Lars is talking about really attracting those individuals that take chances, right? That aren't in a very consistent and ongoing mindset. So can you speak to that a little bit with your experience?
I love that question because I work in the city of Clarkston, and the city of Clarkston is the most diverse square mile in all of America. It's certainly in all of Georgia. And that city is full of people who have taken chances, who have been more resilient than any folks you ever know. Refugees from all corners of the globe. And so one of the things that I do, and I am the chair of the Business and Immigration for Georgia Partnership, or the BIG Partnership, is try to call attention to this community, not just of refugees, but immigrants from other places as well, that is really being underutilized in Georgia. There are many barriers to education, to employment, to entrepreneurship that keep these folks in jobs that are lower than their ability, and where we need them the most. And so I think it's true to say that many of these newcomers have more drive than you see from others who've been here for quite some time and are used to taking risks. And so we'd like to get them more into the workforce, and that's what we're trying to do. And also, I just say many of them come with digital skills as well. I think it is a fallacy that they're only in certain levels of the workforce. It's all across.
There is, from my experience, speaking to thousands of clients from over the years, from any country that you can imagine, that there is some type of a almost mindset within American hiring business culture of, okay, you're coming from a different country, your English is not 100% perfect, then we're not going to hire you. Or we're not going to even take a second look, or you need a visa sponsorship, so we're not going to do it. And so that's something that really I encourage all of you to think differently, because really all the research shows that the more diverse your workforce is, the better off your company is. The more innovative, the more collaboration you can have. And again, it's not that there's not growing pains and pains incorporating foreign-born employees into your culture, into your company culture. But for the most part, it's great. And I can tell you, within my team of 14, I have probably 6 or 7 different nationalities, because it's just wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Karen. And on that topic, Vicki, I think you can shed a little bit of light on that cross-culturalism and how to create a healthy environment with a diverse background, a team of diverse backgrounds and ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of speaking even, and even what the work etiquette is. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I heard somebody say, I can't take credit for this, that people hire for difference, but they onboard for similarity. So you hire people because you want the diversity, you want the representation, you want the numbers, you want the innovation. But then once you get those folks on board, your culture tends to put them into a box. So I want to give you a great example that I actually had to create a whole other arm of my business to address this. So how many of you have been to like a company all hands meeting? Okay, what are those typically like? Usually it's the same people, typically top leadership speaking, and there's lots of slides and business updates, and it's often on the same time zone every time at the same time of either the quarter or, however often they have it. This is a huge wasted opportunity for a diverse workforce. Why aren't we featuring different underrepresented voices at all hands meetings? Why aren't we rotating time zones? Why aren't we? So this is just a small example of how we do tend to hire for difference, but onboard for similarity. So I think what has to happen is if you hire people from different cultures, you have to utilize that to the full advantage that Lars and Karen and John and Darlene are talking about. People who take chances, right, that drive. But you have to give those opportunities. So a company all hands meeting is just one way that you could do that. I've been working with clients to just transform these meetings, rotate speakers, give MC role to diverse groups, historically underrepresented groups. So the phrase I'll leave you with to answer the question is, put inclusion into the flow. Don't let it be a separate thing. I know there's often a DEI department, diversity, equity, inclusion department, and that's good. We need that. But don't let that be where it sits. Put inclusion and diversity into everything you do. Anytime you pick up the phone or go on Zoom, think about the time zone. Think about the communication style. If you're working with India, think about, well, what languages might this person be speaking? Maybe I could learn something about them. And just put that right into the flow of your everyday work.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Vicki. I'll turn to you, John. And thus far, we've talked about professionals that are in the workforce and that have been there for some time. You represent quite a different audience for us, and that's the student or the recent graduate, in our case, Georgia Tech, but really at large, isn't it? What are those students looking for in the workforce?
Well, in fact, I did spend some time researching Generation Z, even though I see them every day. And one of the things Generation Z claims to really want in the workforce is diversity. At Georgia Tech, we have no bias for people who are tech savvy. We tend to process them, to produce them, and to graduate them and to help them find jobs regardless of visa status. I can't count the number of students of mine who are non-national or non-resident who have indeed found a home in the United States. Now, the vetting process is admittedly problematic and requires some administrative legitimate, but and not everybody gets to go back. Some go back and then they come back, the ones that are on certain J visas, Fulbright and the like. I want to answer your question by telling you what the studies tell us, Generation Z, and I see one in the room here. And this is really the result of many studies, and I wonder if they are true to life as findings. But in general, they want a job that's not overly hierarchical. They have high expectations, at least in the early stages anyway, for their employers. And they say they will hold them accountable to meet these expectations. They also expect good compensation packages, which is not surprising. How different is that from any generations going back to times immemorial? But they expect the compensation package to include equal pay and transparency. Equal pay, at least they say they do. Another aspect is solid benefits, which include probably some aspect of mental health, because you're not without knowing that Generation Z has its share of issues. They're not acute issues, but they are there. And you're of the Kurt Lewin School. You're getting a degree at the Chicago School of Psychology, with which I'm familiar. So there is work for you to do with Generation Z. They expect a feeling of community, perhaps best reflected in this place, a feeling of network, which they bring over from their campus experience. I suspect there may be, somebody raised the question of hands-on meetings. I don't think you'll get much community there, but you might. They expect a visible commitment, to repeat myself, to diversity, equity, and inclusion. How well US firms and firms in general do that, subject to question. I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks during the question and answer period. I would say the improvements are notorious and clear to me. I was a high school student coming from Paris, France, in Memphis, Tennessee, at the time of the civil rights movement. I saw my high school, my 1 year in high school, to get a high school diploma, integrated at the force of arms, bayonets, by National Guardsmen. And I was there the year Dr. King got killed during the garbage strike. So I think the US has come a long way. It's reflected in corporate practices. It's reflected in what we do at the university, going beyond formal departments. It's not perfect, but it's a major, major set of steps forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Karen, I'm going to, yeah, go ahead, darling.
I wanted to share something about students, if that's okay. One of the initiatives that we're working on is having access to higher education for Georgia's own refugee and immigrant students. And as we know, DACA students who've been raised here in Georgia are not able to go to Georgia Tech or to other schools and are not able to get in-state tuition. We're trying to change that. It seems kind of, that we need that talent. Same thing's happening with refugees and others. So right now we have individuals coming from Kabul. Yesterday I spent my day with a young woman who risked her life to get an education in Afghanistan, came here to Georgia and cannot continue her education at Georgia State because she can't get in-state tuition. Same thing happening now with Ukrainian students. So we have a lot of wasted talent right here in Georgia already. And what we need to do is build a more inclusive education system in order to have a more inclusive workforce. So I just wanted to bring that perspective as well.
That's
I do have a follow-up question. I didn't follow the legislation, but I have read about it. I thought certain schools were given the leeway to admit students in the university system of Georgia, the 22, the leeway of admitting students without being able to establish their status, or?
The top Georgia schools are not allowed, right, are not allowed. But even across the board, any school, they cannot get in-state tuition. So if they've lived here their whole life, their friends go to school, they get in-state tuition, they do not get in-state tuition, and that is effectively a bar for many students.
And it's really the Board of Regents that holds that power and can change it, but they chose not to, unfortunately.
Not
Actually,
surprised.
Karen, the next question to Lars.
On that for a second.
Of course.
So I think this is very insightful. If you look at America's overall labor participation rate, it has declined significantly over the last 2 decades, and the trend line continues to go down. And there's really no hope in sight. In fact, my work with the Federal Reserve, I mean, they've been tracking this for a long time. They've just brought it to light as of late, and we've all started talking about it. And honestly, we need some sort of cracking of the code. And if this is it, we have to do something about it. And I'm passionate about it because as an employer, you feel it.
Yeah.
And I think many of you work on teams where you try to fill positions almost it's futile. It's destitute to try to fill positions. And again, because the labor participation rate has been trending downward, I mean, it's on track to hit roughly 60% all in the next 1 or 2 years. It's almost a guarantee. And because our birth rate is also a contributing factor or lack thereof, it won't improve. And I think if we have access to talent and the barrier to education stands in the way, and of course the visa process, everything else, I mean, if we can chip away at this helps to improve things. I know this is not an easy discussion, but I just think when you just look at the macroeconomic effect of what's happening, that trend line doesn't reverse itself very easily. By the way, something pretty interesting. I was looking at the overall birth rate by the day for India. It continues to go up. If you just look at their ticker by the day relative to the US, it is moving rapidly minute by minute. And it's just interesting that we have some of these advantages right in our midst, and we're not taking advantage of it.
That's
And
a great point. I'd like to have Karen speak into that actually, because what immigration solutions for companies and schools can we consider to solve some of these staffing issues?
So the short answer to this is think globally. And I'm going to give you some examples. And granted, the U.S. immigration system, the U.S. immigration system is really, really outdated and does not work. And those are two of the nicest things I can say about it. Yeah, exactly. It's really outdated. So the current immigration system that we buy is from 1952. I don't know anything from 1952 that still functions well.
Or 65.
Or 65, yeah, maybe.
My father-in-law's refrigerator, that's
Yeah,
about it.
yeah, I'm a little younger than that, and I still need some stuff replaced and overhauled, right? So, and we have a backlog in the federal government and Congress that just would not change the system. So we're back into this old way of thinking, and we have a new global economy in the past 20 years. So how do we resolve this? So there are several different things that we can think about. And I'll give you one example from my business. And after COVID, we just could not hire a receptionist. Just could not. Hired ads, did everything, have new people. I think I need a different mic. So very young people with no experience, just out of school, and they want $45,000, $50,000 a year for a receptionist job. Once you figure out benefits and everything else, it's an expensive hire. And if any of them were good, I would probably hire them. But you know, one person came in and she quit after 3 days because she wanted to be a beauty consultant part-time, and that was an interesting experience. And we had a few of those that were very interesting. And then, okay, what are we going to do? And so my operations manager is from Dominican Republic, and she's like, well, why don't I hire there? Because, I mean, we transitioned to Zoom phones, and we're all remote, and why can't we do that? And so we hired 2 full-time remote assistants in Dominican Republic, and they're great. They're bilingual in Spanish, and they do everything from there. And voila, we solved this. And in other ways, we imported talent. So into the United States. And it's easier for us because we're an immigration law firm, but,
Sure.
But we've done that for clients as well. So we found strategies and solutions for clients that enable them to basically import the talent from overseas. And now it's a matter of, okay, it's easier to recruit for people abroad because, for example, my marketing manager responded to an ad from Spain. So, you know, they're looking, some young folks from Spain who are graduating, just as an example, don't have good jobs in Spain. They have to go through internships and they get paid less than 1,000 euros a month, and it's barely enough for them to rent a place. So they have to stay back home, live in mommy and daddy, or room with partners, with roommates, and they just can't make ends meet because they just don't, the job market there is just not strong. So they look around. They look for things, you know, for jobs and for an opportunity to leave. So why not us? Why not absorb that talent? And highly educated, highly professional, it's great.
Well,
think
maybe
one
it's time to look for labor market discipline. At the current rate of employment, or unemployment, I should say, it's really difficult. 11 million jobs going vacant, 6 million young people who are job ready but not really putting their name on the market. If we were at a 4 or 5% rate of unemployment, what would happen to this unreasonable demand on the part of an entry-level receptionist, probably with a GED or a high school diploma, wanting $50,000? It might cure it, it might not. That's good old economics. But congratulations on discovering outsourcing, which is what the banking industry, the finance industry have been doing, where, you know, we all talk to a lot of Filipinos every day, every night. I know I do, having been the victim of fraud on my bank accounts, but that does not solve the immigration problem of the United States, nor the labor market problem.
Yeah, no, it does not solve it. It's just an example of how we were able to solve, you know, the current labor shortage need and the unavailability of the local folks.
Yeah, and I think I want to point out, I've worked with Karen for many years, and her firm and Karen herself are extremely enlightened. And so part of why she could solve that problem is because of her mindset. But I think kind of to what Lars and really everyone here is saying, part of the challenge in hiring diverse talent around the world is bias. If you don't have the mindset to want to hire these folks in the first place, you won't do it. That's a huge barrier, is just bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious or both. So I think that that has to shift as well, that we have to start seeing. I still see this every day in my work. So one of my specialties is US-India partnerships. There is still so much bias against Indian employees. They're still seen as back office labor, even though they have so much more to offer than that. And I think unless the teams can get past that, even if they're hired, they won't work together that effectively. There's lots of missed communication, and because there's that mindset that somehow they are less than, they're cheap labor or whatever the bias happens to be. So I think it's really a testament to, folks like Karen and Lars who are hiring and actually saying this is a positive thing. But a lot of companies and a lot of individuals, bias is just baked in. So we have to address that.
And in addition to bias, you do have to make adjustments. You have to make modifications as an employer, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to attract this talent and you won't be able to retain them.
That's true.
So if you're not able to make that modification, then a lot of companies like, this is the way we do business and this is the way we overdo business and that's how we're going to do it.
Then the creativity there's no point in it.
Correct.
Yeah. Darlene, can you speak to that actually? Because you have quite a pool of talent,
Right.
global talent right here. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, I don't know if everybody knows this. 1 in 10 Georgians is foreign born, over 1 million people. Every year, Georgia brings in 2,500 to 3,000 refugees. These are people, like I said, from all spectrums: doctors, lawyers, journalists, IT professionals, welders. We're bringing those folks in every single year. And then too many of them end up working in the chicken factories. So, when I hire at my organization, I go to the refugee service agencies and I say, do you have a computer scientist? Do you have a website designer? Do you have a social worker? Yes, they do. They do, and I hire them. And when we had an event not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, the big partnership co-branded this event with all of the top chambers of commerce: Metro, Georgia Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, Accenture. We all came to this agreement. We have this pool of talent right here in Georgia that is coming every single year and is underused and not well known. And there are barriers. Some of the barriers is, how do you connect with them? There's a lot of refugee service agencies. Which ones do you use, right? So there's a lot that we can do on our end, but we're starting that conversation with businesses. How do we tap into this resource in a way that works for the employers and the employees? And so I would love to talk to anybody about that effort. But I think it's exciting. And with these workforce shortages, we're seeing a lot of interest.
But perhaps we should start at the level of primary and secondary education, and certainly universities in the US. What we do at Georgia Tech in trying to instill a more international, global-minded mindset with our undergrads. We have about 17,000 and some undergrads, a total of 40,000 students. Many of them are remote, doing masters in computer science remotely. But we have changed. We have a Department of Modern Languages which offers all sorts of, it offers Korean, it offers Persian, etc. You go down the list. So our students who might in fact become lawmakers, legislators down the road, are exposed to that. We also, in the case of the business school, of which I'm a member, we have created a global MBA practicum in which we take students to different destinations: Israel, France, Denmark, Tanzania, you name it. So it's an effort that goes in that direction, changing the mindset of the native population, if you wish to call it that. As far as not treating Indians well, I think Georgia Tech would be a testament to the reverse of that. Most of my colleagues are probably Indians, actually. We have 80 faculty members. I would say at least 30 are Indian. They have done very well. They have gotten the credentials. Okay? So I am concerned about systematically considering the US as being bias-laden across the board. There are areas where certainly immigration is one of them. Perhaps the Board of Regents has some biases, and we should expose them, and education can start at any and all levels. But I don't see that in the universities I'm familiar with. Now, what happens to the students once they get out if they don't have the proper paperwork? They come over to you. We help them to the greatest possible extent. We have immigration lawyers on staff at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, but the problem is you're in a bubble. So in a very
We are in the ivory tower.
Yeah, absolutely, and Georgia Tech, and I can
Any
tell you
university.
again another story from personal experience. So we had a huge project that we collaborated with one of the big nonprofits in the area that helped refugees from Afghanistan to resettle, and those are people who worked with the U.S. forces back there and left last year or the year before when the U.S. forces left, and they had 1 year to file asylum applications, and there were like dozens and hundreds of families that needed that assistance, and they had that 1 year deadline, and so it was massive, and so we had to hire somebody with who spoke Dari and Pashto, which are the two languages in Afghanistan. And so we ended up hiring a refugee. But in the HR hiring, if we were not culturally savvy and didn't know how to maneuver that, and your HR is not, and I'm not saying anything about your HR, Lars, but generally in Georgia, if there's somebody with a foreign resume or somebody who doesn't speak English that well, they're not gonna pass the HR screening. And in my example, just as an example, I sent him it was a lawyer in Afghanistan, and he applied for a lawyer job that we had posted. And ironically, I had a different posting for a legal assistant with the Pashto and Dari skills, but he didn't apply to that. And I just sent him an email and I just say, hey, you can't practice law here because you don't have a license, but we have another opening. Would you be interested in that? And he didn't respond because he didn't know how to respond. So I just picked up the phone. I gave him a call and to say, hey, you're sounding interesting. What do you do right now? And he's like, well, I'm delivering for Amazon because that's basically the job that I could get. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, maybe you'd like to utilize your legal skills and help some fellow members of your community to immigrate here. And so we had a good interview on Zoom and hired him. And, he was our first male in an all-female law firm. And
there's diversity,
and he's
too.
Muslim. And again, we accepted him. It was great.
That's awesome.
It was great.
Thank you for sharing, Karen. Lars, I'll bring it back to you. We've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion and cross-culturalism and really widening that lens of creating a diverse team and teams in an organization. All of that diversity does come at, there's endless research that proves that the outcome is extremely beneficial, right? To the company, to the individuals, and to society at large. But it doesn't come without its pain, right? And so when you get a diversity of belief and thought and cultures under one roof, how do you handle that internally?
So we actually, we did something pretty radical about 2 years ago. We actually tied our bonus system to various aspirations. We'd love to call them targets, but we call them aspirations for legal reasons. So that was a major step in us demonstrating some degree of conviction as to why this is most important. I think what has been most difficult along the way, we get into theorizing why diversity is important. Yes, there is statistical evidence that teams and executive teams particularly, or companies rather, that are diverse, they are markedly better than the companies that are not. But when I live within the shell of perhaps not being very diverse, my company's still doing relatively well. I think what I often ask myself is, could we do better? Like what would happen if we were even more diverse? Now we represent, our representation is actually quite healthy. It's 45% diverse, ethnically diverse, 55% white. So that's good by many measures. I just think when you get stuck and you don't use your imagination for what your workforce could become, if you just added these various elements, I think therein lies perhaps your outcome. I've always said to many of the DE&I practitioners and those that are passionate about it, I think we need to narrate a different story, because the one that so many of you have used, which is appropriate, is probably getting a little trite. And I think we need to signal it a little differently and explain at its core, at a fundamental level, why is that so important? In my opinion, it's important because my customers will not give us a break when it comes to looking like them. Doesn't mean they will go to another store, perhaps, but they will think twice. And it does create an impression, depending on your overall representation. The conversations don't treble beyond what they are if I don't have a different mix of individuals. And when you actually say, let's just experiment with this for a second. So I have an all-female leadership team. They are diverse. They're ethnically diverse. My entire team is ethnically diverse. Conversations are different. And so if you don't get to the essence of what that is, and you perhaps hold on to some measurements, and you maybe discount the imagination that can happen, I think you lose out in the end. I don't have the right story for how to what that may look like, but I can tell you that I just think I think there's so much power that can absolutely happen, and people feel like being a part of it. If people look like them, or if it's safe for them to be there, there's so much power in that.
Thank you for sharing. That's really important. And in my experience, I will add to that on that level. I've led teams cross-culturally diverse as they come, from culture and gender and all kinds of walks of life. And the interesting part for me has been to have them feel included. And that's really, really hard. It sounds so simplistic, right? You offer a smile, you greet them, you have common human decency, but it goes way beyond that. It goes exactly to what Lars is talking about I value your opinion. I really, really want to learn about you. I want to understand. I want to understand what it's like to walk in your shoes. And that's where innovation happens, right? And actually just recently, Forbes published, not so recent, it was last year, published an article that diverse teams have a 70% higher chance, 70, of reaching a broader audience. Well, of course, it's exactly it speaks to what you're saying, of just having that. But Vicky, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because your world is really about dissecting what is on one level seen as so wonderful and diverse as power, but tell us about that a little bit.
I really resonated with what you said, Lars, because there are so many statistics coming out, but really making people feel included in any organization is just the right thing to do. There's a center I think we have to come to where we say, this is just what is right beyond the gain that we would have from it, right? It's just the right thing to do. There are still a lot of barriers and challenges. I do see things getting better. I see some of my clients doing things that I would never have imagined even 2 or 3 years ago that people would do. Actually training their managers to recognize people's humanity, recognize their mental health challenges, recognize even terminology that has bias built into it. So words or phrases like executive presence. So as an executive coach, I have a lot of clients from other countries that come to me and they say, oh, Vicky, I want to improve my executive presence. And I say, well, what is that? What does that mean? What does the word professional mean? They say, oh, I want to be more professional. But what is that? Let's look at what it is for you. Let's look at, how do you get your authentic voice out there? So when I coach people to do presentations, I don't try to ask them to conform to a set of standards. It's all about where's your authentic voice. And through those diverse voices, the company does gain. But I think it's exactly to Lars's point, there's a level of imagination you have to have and creativity you have to have around this subject. And I do see companies doing that more than I ever have in the past. So I do feel very, very hopeful. There's still some challenges, chiefly among those being the fact that a lot of teams went virtual during COVID. You have a harder time connecting. You have a harder time seeing cultural differences. So sometimes identities just become like more invisible over Zoom. And therefore you're not getting you're not getting the good conversation about culture. It's sort of all becoming like invisible or something. So that's a challenge. There's other challenge around people being disconnected from the larger purpose of their team. So in Lars's example, looking for people who take chances, making this transition from the combustion engine to the electric car. A virtual team member who's just having meetings every day over Zoom may lose connection with that larger purpose. So I think we need to take every opportunity we possibly can to amplify diverse voices in meetings. Again, I keep coming back to that, but it's a huge wasted opportunity that I see in a lot of companies to bring diversity and inclusion into the everyday flow of just how we think, who we are, what we do, how we center ourselves. And you have to work a bit harder at it in the virtual environment, but it is totally worth the effort.
Thank you.
And I do want to add another problem that exists in a lot of companies is a trust.
Yeah.
It is a trust from the company side to the foreign person, and also the mistrust that a foreign person, like a refugee, for example, or somebody coming from abroad, would have to raise their voice, to voice their opinion, because they would be concerned, okay, maybe I'm going to get fired or demoted, or I'm going to get a demerit for speaking up, or something like that. And so trust has to be developed by the organization and also instilled in the employees to be able to have those open communications.
So true.
I appreciate that. I can't believe we're here already, but I have one final question for all of you, and please answer as you see fit before we open it to our audience. So as we look into the future, what does this international workforce look like, and how can you participate in making it better?
Looks diverse, but it's already diverse, actually. Just I invite you to come to my campus. And the Georgia Tech I joined in the 1980s is not the Georgia Tech of today. It's drastically different. Sure, at the undergrad level, most of them are US citizens. I'm sorry, but they can't help it. But give it a chance. I mean, I'm thinking of the Laos, before you started your practice, the mountaineers, as they were called, who worked with the US in Vietnam, were well integrated, but it took a long time. And they had all the problems you had with the US bureaucracy, all of them. It took them a few years, and then the second generation made the jump and was successful. So I would like to sort of strike a note of hope that, and also I want to say something about degree credentials. It's something I know something about, having sat on so many task forces over the years. Yes, it is true that in the US, if you have a foreign doctorate, you will have a harder time. And if you're an immigrant, and your status is questionable, you have an even harder time. But I got to tell you, I know of a lot of Americans with American degrees who have had a very hard time getting positions in other countries. Now, by and large, Native Americans don't immigrate that much. We have a few in the room, but that's kind of the exception. But this sort of bias, and I call it a non-tariff barrier, to use a trade term, is common. It's a form of economic nationalism. All human societies practice it to a lesser or greater degree. So I just wanted to sort of provide a counterbalance. Admittedly, the case of refugees is heartbreaking, but it is not the generality of the 1 million immigrants coming to the United States every year. Now, they may have a hard time adjusting. It may take half a generation, it may be their kids, but they eventually, by hook or by crook, make it. We know so many.
Other thoughts?
I have two. They're both diverging. So one we're seeing a very interesting social experiment going on in Canada, our neighbors to the north. What they do with immigration is imagination on steroids, quite honestly. I mean, I have an employee whose husband joined her she's on an assignment for us, and he was able to get his work permit in weeks. Same thing for another employee whose girlfriend joined him. She was able to get her work permit in weeks. Never would have happened here in the U.S. And I think that level of provocative, however you want to describe it, I think is pretty interesting, but it remains to be seen what the value creation is for all of that. I think the other thing too is, and I never thought I'd say this in a work environment, for the international workforce, and this is not your question, Nina, but I would say for this to work, I think we need to have love and care in our environments. I never thought I would say that. It's just not a business word. But I think when you love and care for the individuals that work for your company, because they are on the same mission as everyone else, they are part of the overall value chain of what you're trying to create. When you intrinsically feel for that individual, it really doesn't matter who walks through the door. And it also doesn't matter what they do. What Ajay Banga has said very, very openly, I think is leading to a success story at MasterCard. Decency equals equality. Yes, I can treat people with decency, but when I see them as equals on the road to our eventual success, I think you have an international workforce that other companies will die for. So it's a bit of an imagination, but I honestly think it could be the special story.
It's interesting what you said about Canada and compared to the US. Canada is the mosaic society. The US is the melting pot with all of the bumps in the road. And you are here to grease the wheels, hopefully, the two of you.
Well, I mean, Canada has a much better immigration system than the United States has. Far better, and it's more advanced, and it's just. I wish I could, live in Canada. I don't know.
It's
I guess I can. I get life will be easier as an immigration lawyer, I guess, over there. But we are losing a lot of people to Canada. For example, a lot of Indians who can't get green cards or visas, and they graduate from the U.S. universities and they just go and get a sponsor and work visa in Canada because it's easier than getting it here, going through lotteries and things like that, and that's unfortunate. So the long-term solution obviously is legislation and change, but we can't rely on that as individuals and businesses, because I'm going to have a lot more gray hair before that happens. So I think for each of us, first of all, if you are in a hiring influence, over hiring, have an open mind and an open heart, and figure out, even if it's somebody that's not exactly inside your box, maybe the person has other qualities and other experiences that might benefit the team and the company. And even if you have to make accommodations, make them. And it's much more difficult to do in a bigger hierarchical organizations that run like a Swiss machine. And it's more easy for me because I'm the entrepreneur and I can control the destiny of my organization, and it's not that large. And if there's a policy and I need to change it, I just go ahead and change it. But if you have the ability to do that and open your door to somebody else, and your life also personally will be enriched. So there's going to be bumps in the road maybe, but I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
All right, we'll open it up to our audience. And there we go. Mark.
I'll speak loudly. No, it's okay. I hate mics. Huh? Oh, okay. So here's a quick question. I know we're TAG and we love technology, but I think technology is killing hiring. Things like Indeed do not help hiring. When you said, look for somebody who doesn't fit in the box and has other skills, they don't even show up. And then the resume readers kill them anyway. And so I really wonder how much we're getting a better workforce through technology, especially of international people.
I think it very much depends on the technology. So If you look at like companies like Greenhouse Software, they're doing incredible things around hiring and really like putting intention into rooting out bias. And so I think that's true to some extent, but there are companies out there that are intentionally using their imagination to take hiring technology in a completely different direction with the idea of their number one goal being rooting out bias. So I do see some hope on that front, I think is what I meant to say.
But there is a challenge of the automated software that will that a lot of companies use now to exclude candidates fit within exactly the parameters that they want to fit in. But going back 20 years, really networking and getting connections is really probably the best way to get a job, even today. Of all the automation and but maybe Lars.
I'm still stuck on the question. I think it's a really good question because, as a company, you're trying to move at scale. And so, of course, technology becomes the conduit to that. Green, I know Donald Knight very well.
Yeah,
he's a
he's
good friend of
amazing.
mine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, as Vicky so rightly said, I think that's the sort of intentional push that needs to happen. It's an awfully good question because when you hire a team of recruiters, I mean, their job is to hit numbers. And that's the sad reality of it. It doesn't mean that they are any less human than the next person that wants to do the right thing. I just think we are certainly dependent on technology. I do think, though, when it comes down to making the hiring decision, that we know is not technology based, relatively. And so I do have some hope that if people have the right intention, it will still hopefully lead to the right outcome. But I just think the macroeconomic burden that we're facing in our labor environment, I think everyone needs to be cognizant of what's really going on. We need to get on the other side of ourselves, and some of these hard and fast hiring measures and parameters that we put in place in the name of making the right selection, it's not serving us very well. So.
Can I add a policy perspective to this question? We're talking a lot about individual hiring. Georgia lags far behind other states in dealing with this problem. Georgia has 400,000 job openings right now with one of the lowest unemployment rates ever. What is it doing to bring in folks into this? Why do we wait a generation to bring talent into the workforce? We don't have to. So one thing I had mentioned to Nina is the Office of Global Michigan. Michigan was in a slump with Detroit years ago, and decided to create an Office of Global Michigan, which attracted global business and global talent. Help these folks sign up, get their competencies listed, get their degrees translated, get them connected to businesses. And that actually was a recruiting tool for Michigan, because if you're a skilled employee or trades person from another country, you'll move to whichever state allows you back into your field. So Global Michigan, we right now, Georgia and Georgia Tech, are a center for global industry, global companies. We have an Office of Economic Development. We do not have an Office of Global Talent. We're bringing in business, but we're not dealing with the talent. So there are ways we could do this, and we don't have to wait a generation for them to come into our workforce. We can learn from other states and start building a more inclusive workforce right now.
I'd like to note, I agree with you, that Georgia actually does better than you think. It has a technical college system with 22 units, quick start program that have attracted countless jobs, have turned immigrants into actual work employees ready for the workplace in 2 years or less, tailor-made for the needs of companies, small and medium-sized, coming from within the US or without the US. So it's not altogether true that Georgia lags, because if you look at the evolution of its demography and the number of foreign direct investment related jobs created, of which Mercedes-Benz is one of them, by the way, as a corporation, it's by and large, I would say a success story. I can remember in the southeastern United States working for the Dean Rusk Center when Georgia started to become international. The only thing international in the southeast was the 85 corridor with the South Carolinians attracting foreign companies, of which Mercedes was not one. So we've come a long way, in fairness.
I agree. But there are still barriers to entering those
yeah,
vocational
huge.
colleges. There are barriers to entering universities, and they're outdated barriers. We need to start thinking about how do we get these folks into those great schools that we now have.
I want to support your comment. So I work closely with MAC, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, and we talked about this back in August. And I said, guys, look, you guys recruited us, and you do a phenomenal job at recruiting a ton of companies. I mean, you just look at their list. Their hit list is very good, but they don't have the proportion that we don't have the proportion that we should have in attracting the talent. At one time, there was a Choose ATL initiative. I think it still exists. But the impetus of that was because Georgia, amongst all top tier cities across the country, across all top tier cities across the country, was last in retaining university graduates. I think the percentage was like 3%. So as much as the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, their economic development task force or initiative is doing a phenomenal job recruiting some of the best brands, we actually need to bring in a flood of talent, because the recruiting is still of those companies has still been the same. Diverse talent, our highway system, our airport. And so people sign up. FanDuel, one of the most recent companies, Microsoft, the rest of them. And you go on and on and on. They're coming because they expect a talent pool. And it's been short. Thankfully, we got here in 2015. But I can tell you, we suffer the same fate as everyone else.
There was a major landmark study by Richard Florida, you may recall, how to attract and retain technological talent. Well, the key was to create a bohemian culture, to create a cultural environment that attracts young people. And Atlanta was drastically deficient in that in the 80s, 90s. It's changed a lot. If you look at West Side parts of Atlanta and so on. But I think you caught the wave just in time.
Thank you. Normally, there's multiple questions. That was one question and a 10-minute discussion. Do we have one final question before we close out? Yes, thank you.
It's more of a comment. One, just fantastic. Thank you all. Amazing. A part of me thinks that as Americans, we've forgotten where we came from. And maybe that's an imaginative discussion that can happen in companies. And I've done it through the last couple of years when, there's been debate, a lot of debate, obviously, the politicized debate. And if you ask where someone's come from, if they don't know, they're not as in tune with the issues of the day. And so that's one thing. And I mean, where their heritage is from, to become Americans. So I think that's an important one. The other thing is, if you haven't watched Ken Burns' American Experience, New York City, it's 8 segments. Do yourself a favor, because it's an incredible education about what immigration has meant to America. And if you watch that and I mean, the amount of information that I never heard about in there, in the education that I have, it really is amazing. It's eye-opening. And it's about, we are a part of something greater than just one perspective. And so it feeds right into the imagination, everything all of you've talked about. So that's, one thing I would add.
Here.
I think also between Metro Chamber and other, and I've talked to the Metro Chamber people before about it, is have more of an awareness campaign in international destinations. Because everybody heard about New York, everybody heard about Miami, everybody heard about Los Angeles, who is foreign born. But there's a much smaller percentage of people who heard about Atlanta. And why do people come here? Usually is where they have family, somebody knows somebody, and things like that. But it's rarely because I heard about Atlanta as a great place to live. after they, visit and after they hear about it, after they do the research, they get it. But beforehand, it's really the awareness that has to at least start seeping through.
Well, I do want to bring us to